Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. I am your host, Tracy Stuckrath, and I am so excited today to kick off Women's History Month with my guests. And we're going to uncover the rich halal traditions with Yvonne Maffei just before Ramadan starts this weekend. So I'm excited to chat with you. So hello, Yvonne.
Hello, Tracy. Thank you so much for having me. I've been so excited to do this with you.
I know. And we were connected like 3 or 4 years ago from our friend Sally, and just reconnected in January. So
thank you so much for reaching out. That was so great to hear from you. And then you had all these great ideas about reconnecting on Ramadan.
Yeah, I'm so excited. And actually, I have to thank my friend Allison, because she sent me a question about, hey, I've got some people who requested halal at my meeting, and what do I do? And and that's how I reached out to you. So Allison, thank you. And Sally, thank you. So, okay, so you are, and for everybody to know, Yvonne is an internationally recognized chef. She's an author, a recipe developer, a writer, and an advocate on the global halal industry. She's a researcher on the Mediterranean diet, global food and water security, and a lover of all things related to olive oil. So that's the premise of this thing, but we're going to talk a premise of who she is, but we're really going to talk about what she does, what halal is, and as we approach Ramadan, because I know it's when we plan meetings, I think the statistic I heard years ago was that there's only 84 days in the year that are, if even that don't have a religious holiday on them or a government holiday on them. And we can't plan all of our meetings around that. So when we do have meetings that fall on Ramadan, I want people to understand what that means. And so we're going to have her help us do that. So Yvonne, will you tell the audience about what you do and what inspired you to do it with My Halal Kitchen?
Well, it goes back quite some time now. It's hard to believe that almost 15 years have passed since I've started this. I can't believe, the time just flew. We don't remember when blogs weren't a thing, and then they were all of a sudden, and people started writing about food. And that's kind of what I did in 2008. I started a blog called My Halal Kitchen because I saw that people weren't really talking about halal food and recipes. And I'd always been a foodie. I guess that wasn't really a term back then, but I grew up in an Italian and Puerto Rican family in the Midwest in Ohio. But it was such a big part of my life. And we don't think about it. It is what it is. And it was normal to me. Of course, when I left home and went off to school, then you realize that you've really got to learn your culture, your food, and so on and so forth. But in those years of before starting the blog, I became Muslim, and I was around 27 years old. I became Muslim and adopted the diet of food and a lifestyle. And what that means is that I stopped eating pork and having anything alcohol related, whether it's food or just straight consumption of alcohol or in food. That can kind of pose a problem with certain cuisines that I grew up with and that I love. So I started the website to show people that you could make halal food with substitutes, like Italian food with substitutes for the alcohol or the pork. So that was sort of for the Muslim community to kind of learn how to make authentic global cuisine, but also for everyone else who kind of didn't understand what halal was and maybe was a little taken aback by it, or like, what is that? Or it's weird, or it's strange, or all kinds of things related to the unknown. I wanted to sort of literally unveil what this means for everybody. And so I sort of see myself as that person in the middle who can explain to both sides what's going on.
I mean, I find it fascinating that you grew up eating Italian and Puerto Rican, and then you're taking those flavors that you grew up with and then converting them to halal, and it's allowing so many more people to understand three different types of cuisines in a different way.
Yeah. I was really fortunate growing up because my parents they weren't interested in only eating their cuisine. And also I grew up in a town where there were lots and lots of people from around the world. Small town in Ohio, but it attracted people from Greece and Poland and Hungary. So we would have these international festivals every year, and my parents would take me, and I would try everything from pierogies to souvlaki to everything. I mean, they exposed me to everything. And so I grew up with a love for global cuisine. And so when I became Muslim and I met people in my community who had never tasted an authentic Italian lasagna or a Mexican taco, or I was like, wait a minute, we got to change this. And all it was just kind of figuring out the right flavor profiles for the substitutions. So then that led me into a whole new career of recipe testing and development, of getting things to the most authentic flavor that I could while keeping recipes as traditional as possible. Because I really believe, I'm a purist. That's the funny part, is that I'm really a purist when it comes to tradition and traditional foods, but I also want to enjoy everything. So that was my driving force. Like, I want to eat this. And so I'm going to figure out how to make it happen and share that with others so they can too. And in the meantime, explain to the people who are not eating halal and maybe don't understand our way of life that this is an inclusive thing. This is trying to bring everyone to the table, that I can enjoy a French meal, but it's halal. And it hopefully wouldn't offend anybody who's saying, well, you eat halal, but that means you can't have French food. No, that's not true. We can make it that way. It was sort of me kind of figuring out the compromise to culinary diplomacy or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even when Allison called and then I called and asked you, you're like, well, we just need to go to the grocery store and buy these couple of items, and you can make what they're serving already. You can make it halal. Yeah. So it's somewhat that simple in some respects.
The questions I most often got, and it was from my family, first of all, was, well, okay, so that now that you're eating halal, you have to eat Middle Eastern food. Does it have to be like kebabs and shawarmas? And they were sort of taken aback, but they were serious, because that's their mindset, was halal equals Middle Eastern food, or maybe Indian or Pakistani food. And then I thought, I wasn't thinking that, but that was their notion. So it made me understand where they were coming from. And it really made the whole thing more important for me to sort of focus on anything that was not traditionally seen as coming from a Muslim country, because I wanted people to. So in my second cookbook, I really focused on American food, Latin food, Italian, French, and Asian, because those were the cuisines that people really don't associate with being halal, but make them all halal. So it's an interesting way of kind of getting everybody together and not having the separation of Muslims, non-Muslims, halal, not halal. Because now, and all these years later, people are enjoying halal food in many forms, and it's delicious, it's tasty, as long as it's made that way. It's become, in the beginning, it wasn't this way. In the beginning, it was just this unknown, and people, we had people who were like questioning so much about what do you do with the meat and things like that. And it's still, we have those questions, but it's not as contentious as it used to be. Now there's a lot of people doing it, and mostly in food forms.
Well, it also reminds me of a conversation I had with Amelia Eckes, who works in corporate dining, and at one of her clients years ago, she got permission to buy all halal meats to serve except for the pork items. Everything that they served in that corporate dining facility was made halal because of the way they did it, so they could meet the needs of everybody that worked at that company. And so kind of that same kind of premise that you just talked about. It's just rethinking some things. Yeah.
And I find it really interesting that when I did my book tours, I had more of the non-Muslims showing up to understand halal than Muslims coming to kind of celebrate what is halal or in the cookbook. It was so fascinating. I'm so glad that happened, because people were really interested in, well, what does this halal thing mean? And when they understood it, let's say from a more scientific point of view, like the benefits of doing things in a halal way, scientifically, hygienically, for the animal in terms of the humanity of the sacrifice, things like that. When they really understood those things, they were okay with it. Most people, I never had anybody say, oh, I don't. Actually, most people were like, oh, so I'm going to look for halal when I go to the grocery store. Because when you kind of separate, I mean, for us, it is a divine religious injunction. Like, that's why we do it as Muslims. But we also see that there's a lot of so many scientific benefits to it. So for us, it's faith and then science. But for a lot of people, they see that, oh, it makes sense to do certain aspects of it, and it could be healthier, more transparent. Right. They can come up with their own conclusions. But most of the time, people have come to me and said, I will look for halal, and I'll be okay with halal if it's served, because it's just about giving information and teaching. Right. You know what it is. It is what it is, and explaining. But I think before, many years ago, people weren't talking about it as much. Right. It was something that Muslims understood, but it wasn't really talked about outside. Now it's so much different, thankfully.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Before we go further, my next question, I want to say hi to Lindsay and Kevin and Robert and one other person on Instagram. So thank you for joining. And we do have the first question that came in, and we're good. Sorry for my background. We're working from home. Came in from a Facebook user, because we're jumping into Ramadan here, but really how to be inclusive at meetings during Ramadan when there are speakers at meals. So I want to jump into that question first, and then I really want to touch on what is halal mean so people understand it, if we can do that in a fashion. But
yeah, so the workplace during Ramadan is a really important topic, and I'm so glad it's being addressed. Thank you, because Muslims are fasting during the month of Ramadan. Right? Ramadan is it's a month in the Islamic calendar. It's the 9th month of the Islamic calendar. So Muslims will follow a lunar calendar. Of course, we follow the other calendar, but it's really, at home, we pay attention to these things. And Ramadan comes at a different time every year because it's lunar. The calendar is lunar, so it doesn't come the same time this year as it will next year. Like this year, it's coming around this Sunday, actually. Yeah. And we pay attention to the phases of the moon, and our prayer times, which are 5 times a day, are based on this calendar, this daily calendar. And so when in Ramadan, the thing that's most known about it is that we're fasting the entire month. Right. What does that fasting mean? It means nothing to drink and nothing to eat, but only during certain times of this day. Okay. So before sunset, just before sunrise and until sunset. So we have calendars at home that tell us exactly when the sun rises per location and when the sun sets. So for me versus somebody even 2 states away, it's different. It's a different time, or a couple of cities away, it could be a slightly different time. So before sunrise could be, let's say, 4:30 in the morning. So we have to have a little meal, or we should have a little meal very early to drink a little something before that time cuts off, and we stop eating, stop drinking. And then we go the whole day, not even a sip of water, until the sun sets, at the exact moment the sun sets. So everybody knows, believe me, in Ramadan, everybody knows the exact time the sun sets. Wherever you are, 5:33. Be sure that you're, because we're hungry. But break fast with a sip of water or something to drink, and usually a date, but that's more tradition than it is like must be. So when you're in a meeting and there's food and someone who's Muslim, visibly Muslim or not, refuses to eat politely, they're okay. Like, don't feel sorry for them, or don't feel bad. They're fine with it. They chose to do this, and you can eat in front of them. Like, most people, I think, feel like, oh, I don't want to eat in front of them. But we're used to it. It's totally fine, because it's the workday. There's nothing. We don't expect everybody to be fasting along with us, right? It's right. Fun. Now, if a meeting runs past sunset, as it does, like, let's say in the summertime, right? Sunsets, I'm sorry, in the winter, the
In
sun
the winter.
earlier. I've been in classes and meetings where it's time to break my fast. Now, someone's not going to get up and go have a meal, but they like want a glass of water or have a little something in their purse or bag to eat, and then take a break to pray and then go and eat. So the day is very structured for Muslims, but the fasting is pretty cut and dry. Like there's nothing going on until the sun sets. But I think that just the acknowledgement that someone's fasting it goes a long way.
Right.
But I would say that alone will make people feel a lot more at ease. But they don't, most Muslims, they're not going to want to make you feel uncomfortable or awkward over their fasting.
Well, okay. So, and that person that asked is Joan. And then Nancy just followed up with this comment. In 2014, the general chair for the conference was observing Ramadan, some of the attendees. And so they worked with the hotel to ensure they could accommodate them at specific times later in the evening.
That's nice.
And,
That's so nice.
Yeah. And I think Joan, hang on one second, because Joan wants to know specifically what is now being addressed, the timing of speakers that are critical to hear. So I guess that also comes in with your prayer times, maybe?
So yeah, when the sun sets, we do have a prayer that happens around that time. So in Ramadan, there's a specific sort of process, I guess you could say. I mean, it's not, what happens is that you break the fast at sunset with, like I said, like if you're sitting at a meeting, you're not going to usually like leave and go have this long, elaborate meal, but you are going to try to at least break your fast. It's very important for Muslims to break their fast at the appropriate time. So there's no delaying it. They won't like wait 15 minutes to go have that sip of water. They'll do it pretty much on time. And that's just across the board. And then they will need to step out to pray, typically for 5 minutes or so. And then in a normal setting, if they don't have to be in a meeting or don't have to be doing something else, they will then, that's the time to go and eat something, to have a little meal. If there's something really important going on, a lot of people will delay the meal because they have to. But if it's not crucial or they can eat there at the table, that's a great time to just give them something to eat, like sandwich or fruit or something, because obviously they haven't eaten all day. So that's something to pay attention to. But other than that, I think we're pretty easygoing about it, especially during really important work things.
Right. Well, and I realized that also this week it's daylight savings time. So that's adding a whole nother, it's the same weekend as, That does skew things a little bit. It's
Ramadan is hard when the days are longer. It's harder.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because now we're going into in the summertime, it's definitely 9 p.m., 9:30.
Yes. Yeah. And in some places, as you go further north, it's even longer. Right.
Right.
So
what do you do in Alaska when the sun never sets?
Oh, so most of the people there, they will go by either the closest location to them that has a reasonable sunsetting time. They'll usually do that because they can't. The continuous fast is not allowed, so you can't.
Okay.
Do that. Yeah, you have.
That's important to know. Okay.
Yeah, it's a daily thing. Remember, so in the evening, when after that meal happens, a couple hours later, people will usually nibble and have other things, and Muslims don't tend to get a lot of sleep in Ramadan because think about it. When you're maybe getting ready to go to bed, we're kind of just having food and then it's sleep. And then you have to kind of get up again very early to have something before you start your fasting day. So I would say, if there's one thing, try to go easy on people who are fasting because you're tired. It's really, it's an exhausting thing, but Muslims will hide it very well. We tend to really, because you're not supposed to look like you're suffering. It's not supposed to be. It's not intended to make us suffer. It's intended to understand the suffering of people who don't have food and to be appreciative of what you do have and to have more focus on certain other aspects of life. So that's not the intention, but it is nice to take a breather in the middle of the day or something.
Right.
Yeah. Now we'll try to nap or something.
Oh, well, that's a good idea. And after you nap is not a bad thing.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked about Ramadan some. So talk about halal and the types of food. I know you said no pork and no alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So what other things and one hotel chef said to me, or I overheard years ago, is kind of what you're teaching is that, well, we don't have to necessarily get it from a halal caterer. We can do it if we follow specific practices and make it in the kitchen there. Is that of the essence true, or can you explain halal and what we should be feeding our guests who are practicing?
Sure. So the definition of halal literally means permissible. And in this context, permissible foods. So when it comes to meat, the meat has to, so let's say for example, we don't eat pork. There are other types of meat we don't eat, but they aren't common in Western society. So I'm not going to mention those. And then there's the alcohol. But let's focus on meat for a minute, because let's say we can have chicken, we can have duck, we can have goat meat, lamb, beef. But that's a halal animal. It's a permissible animal. But it also has to be sacrificed in what is called the biha manner. And that means that it's ritually sacrificed. So the animal has been properly sacrificed and processed. And that involves a specific way of doing things, very similar to kosher method, very minimal pain to the animal. The blood has to be drained out of the animal. So that's not always done in conventional sacrifice of animals. And that's why there's the permissible, and then there's the sacrifice, the ritual sacrifice that has to happen. That's why halal certified meats are very important, because they give assurance that it's been done. If you can't find halal by any means, you can also do kosher. That is allowed if you can't find halal. So you can't just take any chicken from the grocery store, right, and bring it and process it. But if you have a halal chicken, or you know that it's halal, or someone is verified it or certified is the best way in the case of hotels and things like that, right?
Right.
Yes, you can bring it to your kitchen, and as long as care has been taken that it's not mixed with anything else that's not halal, like no utensils have touched it that have been mixed with non-halal beef, for example, or non-halal chicken or pork, obviously, or anything alcohol, dipped in alcohol sauce or something. And so it's not that you have to have a separate kitchen, but you just have to have a space where you can ensure that things are not crossing over. So, and that a chef or two people are dedicated to kind of like just making sure that recipe or that dish has been prepared in the halal way. It's enough, really.
Right.
In my opinion, you don't have to have, a designated halal kitchen to do that. It'd be great, but I think that's not very practical. That's why some places just choose to say the whole thing is halal and make all of it halal, because then they know that if they have a sizable portion of Muslim customers, or it's worth it for some people. But in other cases, you don't have to. It's not that complicated. We don't have to make it that complicated. We just have to have assurances.
No, and Joan just piped in, then it's like a kosher kitchen where there can be no cross-contamination, cross-contact. And I would say the same thing with when you're talking about food allergies as well. You want to make sure that if you're serving peanuts, somebody's allergic to peanuts, you need to eliminate that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Perfect. And that's can make it kind of helpful, because going back to my statement about Allison, I think her event was in Charleston and was trying to figure out what to do for those two people who requested halal, is finding those meats and making sure that caterer was providing it in the right manner, or finding a restaurant that was going to do the same.
Exactly. Now, in the case with just a couple of clients or customers that halal, you don't have to go and get tons and tons of meat just to satisfy two people. You can find a source of maybe a local butcher, or even stores like Walmart carry halal now. And you can go there's Crescent Chicken, which is in a lot of Walmarts around the US. And so it's become, it's not like all over the place, but it is more and more available than years ago. but they're like, if you look up Mediterranean or Middle Eastern markets,
Okay.
town has them nowadays. You will find halal meats that you can go in, order, or just buy. So for small amounts, it works.
Right. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's really good to know. I mean, because that can help some smaller events or small contingencies of people that request that, right? Versus like 2 years ago, I planned an event during Passover, and we had one person who was Orthodox Jew traveling for that time, and she had never traveled during Passover before. So we were learning at the same time of what we could serve her, right? And so, but it was really finding the right person to take care of it.
And I'd also like to add that the chefs don't have to be Muslim. Some people kind of think, oh, maybe there has to be a Muslim involved or a Muslim preparing it, but that's not the case. As long as the products are halal and the process is halal, that's why I tend to train chefs of all backgrounds. I say, if you can understand how to do halal, you can serve a lot more people, because you don't have to be Muslim to prepare the food. It just has to be the right elements.
Okay. So what is the market for, I mean, I was doing a little bit of research, and it seems that people eating halal is growing dramatically. Is that true?
Yes, it is true. And worldwide, the demand for halal is growing into like the projected amounts were in like the trillions. The last of that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it has to do with a few things. Surely demographics, population growing, but also people are growing a bit more conservative religiously. But I think it's another thing as well. In my own research, what I tend to find is that more and more people are concerned about their health, and more non-Muslims are interested in halal and other ways of eating that give them some idea of transparency. Where is the food coming from? That they can trace it back, that, that there's, maybe a single farm or care being given to these animals, things like that. Like, I think more and more people care so much about that. And the transparency of halal is what's really giving it the demand, right?
Right.
People want to know, like, where's our food?
Oh, yeah. More and more people are really wanting to do that. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is Joan again, but I think this is really important too, because Ramadan, Passover, and Easter all intersect this spring. And that's actually something that happened that week. I actually really wanted that event that I did where I had somebody it was Passover. It was also Ramadan. And I'm like, oh, let me have both people, please. Because I really wanted to figure it out and what to serve. But Joan, thanks for pointing that out, because that really is important to understand. And even with Lent, like, what are you serving on Fridays?
Yes.
And
I grew up Catholic, so I know, I remember Friday Lent, Friday fish fries, and abstaining from certain things during Lent. And so Ramadan is very similar to that. I mean, that idea of the discipline. But I think it's beautiful when all of these holidays intersect at the same time. And if there's a way that everybody can sort of get together at the table, would be amazing.
Right. Oh, exactly. Something
like that. But
all right. So part of your work is training hotels and chefs. So how are you, have any of them, I mean, they're hotel chefs, right? Or a variety of things. So how have they embrace this? Have you seen, are you getting more requests for that? And do you see that it's the training, and this kind of comes to another question that Joan asked, is it coming to the salespeople as well, not just the chefs, but is it filtering down to other people in the hotel or convention center offices that are responsible for selling the menus and helping meeting planners design the menus outside of the chef?
That's a great question. What I have seen it's changed over the years. I mean, there's always been an interest, but in the past year or two, it's just exploded in terms of how much demand there is particularly in universities. I did event at Yale University, and I was speaking to people at Yale Hospitality, but also all these other chefs that were coming from other universities around the country and in Canada. I was just bombarded with questions about, okay, we really want to do this halal thing. And they're intent on creating great recipes, vegan recipes, Mediterranean inspired, Middle Eastern, whatever, but they cannot get the supply. That's the problem. Okay. The problem is in what I've been told over and over again is that they can't get enough chicken. They can't get enough beef.
Oh, wow.
They can get lamb, but even that lamb is a little bit more expensive. So the trick is in sourcing, in sourcing, getting a really good supply. And I think what is going to need to happen is that hotels, whether it's hotels, universities, hospitals, are going to have to start looking locally for their supply. They're going to have to start reaching out to farmers who can source them. And that would be such a great thing because the local stuff can be fresh and start supporting. But that's a whole endeavor in and of itself. But I'm just addressing the bottleneck that I see. And there's no lack of interest. There's no lack of demand. And universities and hospitals and hotels, everybody wants to meet that demand. But we have to get the product, right, to do that. Yeah. So we can do vegan and you can do vegetarian kind of easier. In the halal sense, there isn't much to deal with except no alcohol, which isn't usually in stuff anyway. But it's the meat is the biggest issue.
Well, and that goes back to wanting people to eat healthier, and 2, wanting to know where their food is coming from, and 3, they want to eat local because it is fresher. And and I'm glad that you pointed that out. It does come along with that meat. It's not just fruits and vegetables that we're thinking about that aspect as well.
Would be great to support our local farmers too. I think like we could cross off so many great things by creating programs like that, but that's a whole other endeavor, which I would love to be part of. But in the meantime, there was a question about addressing the chefs and training, right? I can't remember the entire question. But here's what I do is I try to train chefs, whether up and coming chefs at culinary schools or chefs who are already established in industry and hospitality, go in and say, this is how you can easily make things in a halal way. This is what you do in your industrial kitchens to create halal products, dishes for your guests, and just give them the simple solutions that it takes to do that. Because they already have the recipe ideas. They're chefs. Right. They don't really need, once they know they have the tools and information, they can run with it.
Yeah. Well, that's so funny. And I love, so like, I'm just thinking of menus that I've been looking at. I'm like, there's the Italian menu and the buffet and the sandwich buffet or whatever. I'm like, you can make those all halal.
Make everything halal. It doesn't have to be. That's the thing I really want people to understand is that it doesn't have to be Middle Eastern or Asian, South Asian. Those are great and wonderful. And I think people are really into Middle Eastern food right now, which is awesome. Right. It's so healthy. But you can have anything. Make anything well. Make your French onion soup, your beef bourguignon, your pasta with meatballs. I mean, I do it all because I can, right? Like this is, there are easy ways to do it. And I've had chefs say to me, well, I've had French chefs actually say to me, well, how do you substitute the alcohol? And I'll say, well, it's really just simple. I use this do this and this for certain French French dishes and so on. And they'll say, really? I mean, like juices and things like that. Like because I just tested over the years how, and I already knew what they tasted like from my previous life. So I was in the perfect position to do that, but it really is that simple. It really is. Wow. And I love that because I want people to feel they can hold on to their traditional recipes. They can, because your food is your culture, your food, it's all one. And you shouldn't have to give it up just because of a dietary restriction.
Right. Exactly. Oh, I love that. Yeah. You shouldn't have to give it up. I mean, and my friend Martha, who is a food allergy chef, she's the same way. I'm like, she wants to be able to make people eat what they wanted to eat in a safe manner. Yes. Okay. So Ronnie on LinkedIn here has a question. What can you drink with a halal meal? Is milk yogurt permissible with meat or chicken? So that's kind of that kosher question too.
Yes. Because I understand in kosher that you can't mix milk with meat, at least for a couple hours, you know, in the meals. This is not the case with halal. You can have a cheeseburger. You can have milk or yogurt with meat dishes. So that's that's different with between halal and kosher. But those things are so similar. But that is, in halal, it's fine.
Okay, good. And this was in a comment. Oh, International Association of Venue Managers needs to have you as at one of their meetings. Convention centers are not up to speed, nor are their catering outlets.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, you and I need to tag team on that. Let's go for that. Yes.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks for that, Joan. Okay, so Women's History Month. Who has influenced you? What woman, mother, grandmother, other women has influenced you in your career?
Career or cooking?
Or both.
Both?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I grew up with women who, like grandmothers and mother who, and aunts who, basically kids were not allowed in the kitchen, right? It was an adult thing, a mom thing. We were set off to play and do the other thing. But the food was so good all my life that I just thought, I need to learn how to make all this. So
yeah, learn how to make it until you're older.
Yeah. They were like, go study. And my mom kept saying, go study. I wanted to go to culinary school. Go study. But it was just an obsession. Like, I have to know how to recreate what I grew up eating. And so in a sense, my grandmothers, my mother, they were all influential. I have an aunt who lived in Sicily for most of my youth. And when I went to visit her, she and her husband, my uncle, taught me how to shop for things, how to make traditional Sicilian foods. And that kind of ignited the fire inside of me to cook and to learn traditional things. So I think it's usually the ones closest to us. But then as I traveled, I think I always gravitated towards grandmothers and women who were willing to teach the old ways of doing something, whether it was in Mexico or Spain or wherever I would go, I would gravitate towards some woman who would show me, how do you make something? Right. And they were always happy to do that. So I feel like in my mind, my teachers and mentors were always those women who gave up their time to show me how to do things.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it reminds me of a conversation like in COVID. And I think it was when a lot of refugees were coming, and it's a gentleman from Canada, Len, and I forgot the name of his place, but it was like all these grandmothers coming in. He gave them a space to make their traditional meals for a month or a week or whatever. And so that, because food is how we celebrate and that's the only thing they could bring with them was their recipes.
Yes. Yes. It's like, I think the topic of food it's trendy now, right? We kind of see it everywhere, but I think it's because we're all longing for that something to hold on to. It's the one thing that maybe people can't take away from you is if you have a dish in your mind, it's something that's comforting to you and you can make it on those days you're stressed out or homesick or whatever. The smell of tomatoes and sauce will forever remind me of my Sicilian grandmother. I mean, it just brings something back. Nobody can take that away from you. And I think that even though she couldn't really teach me her recipes, because if I would ask her, she'd say, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But she taught me about what it does to glue the family together, right? That those meals, that sacrifice, it was her way of saying, you are my tribe, you are my people, you are my world. And this food is what I do to keep us all together. And that's something that has really made me feel like when I started doing halal and I felt it might separate me from the people that I love because it now became so different. I think that was my driving force for wanting to make sure that I never lost the traditions that I grew up with, or that no one else ever lost traditions just because they kind of changed their diet.
I think that's a really important, really poignant point to make, because whether it's a religious-based need or it's a medical need, medical food allergy, etc., just because of that, you don't want to lose that part of you, that food, those memories, etc.
Yeah, food it's a very emotional trigger for people, and hopefully it lets us get a good one, right? Not
right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Not a bad one. Yeah. Well, we won't go on and talk about bad ones, but we don't need to do that. So what has been your favorite food place in the world to cook and eat? Because you travel all over.
Oh, my favorite place to cook and eat. I guess it's going to sound kind of corny, but it really is wherever my kitchen is, because that's the place I can cocoon myself away from the world when the world gets messy, which it is quite often. Cooking has always been sort of a therapy for me. Not the one constant I have, I think. I've had many kitchens around the world and at home. And I think I tend to like fix it up and have the things I need and the ingredients and I can sort of create some magic there. So that tends to be, and then I can bring people into my little world the way that I, and have that thing that my grandmother did, right? Which was to say, my people, and that's a powerful thing. You can't get at a restaurant. You can't get anywhere else. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
it does. Yeah.
Is that home is very important to me. And when I bring people into that space, it's saying more than just food's ready. It's saying that I love you and I want to nurture you. I think most people who love food and love cooking and chefs, they have that similar need to nurture. But I'm grateful that I got that from the women in my life.
That's awesome. Okay, jumping to a different question, not food or Women's History Month related, but how can meeting planners work with chefs and their convention catering services managers to better serve their guests who have requested halal? Do you have any suggestions?
Meeting planners working with chefs
how can we incorporate halal into the menus? I mean, is it, and I guess you kind of addressed it a little bit saying if it's one or two people we can go do this, but is there a way thinking forward, even if there was a larger contingency of people, how would he do that?
I think communication is really key here. That a lot of times, like me as a consumer, when I go someplace, if it's not apparent to me that something is halal, I may not even want to ask. I mean, I do ask, but I feel it's an added step. Or if you feel like you have to wait to ask, or you maybe you annoy somebody if you ask. So communication, I think, is a really big thing. Like I've seen in the past where many companies didn't want to announce that they were offering halal. And maybe that was a more political thing or whatever. But that's changing. Thankfully, that's changing. But I think where I'm going with this is that if they can come up with ways to sort of say that they do have halal offerings, like whether it's for a wedding planning or business meetings, like you offer halal meals or meats, whatever, let it be known a little bit more. I think people would really make their choices to work with a venue if halal was offered. I don't think that people realize, and this goes with F&B products as much as it does with venues, is that when halal is offered, you have no idea the positive feedback that you get from the Muslim community and how fast that spreads among the Muslim community. I mean, we are a very viral community in that sense. Like we talk, when something's halal, I will tell 5 people and they will tell 5 people. And so it becomes a place that people want to go to. They'll check and they'll verify. And as long as things are in order, I think to get the ducks in order is really important. Like get products that are certified, have your SOPs in place to ensure that halal is done right. Work with somebody like that could just kind of make sure that you're doing it right. That's fine. Nothing too expensive and nothing too grand, but get those ducks in order and then communicate that to the community around you.
Right.
That will just change things. That really will.
Okay.
Beneficial.
That's awesome. Well, and that's really part of meeting planner needs to add those to the SOP, their SOPs, then to pass them on to the caterer for sure. Okay. Now I'm going to throw a loop on that. Well, what if we're doing a meeting and we have an offsite dinner, right? And how, I mean, like at a restaurant, right? So how are we going to, do we have to go find those Mediterranean restaurants instead?
No, not necessarily. No.
Okay.
This is the beauty of halal that I like to talk about, because there's lots of options. Like you could call the let's say you're doing an offsite meeting at a restaurant and you say to the restaurant, I have somebody who eats halal. Do you know what that means? Or sometimes they don't. If they say, no, we don't have halal meat. Okay. Do you have fish? Do you have any? Okay. Now, some Muslims will not eat all kinds of fish, but let's say like shrimp is usually okay. Or white fish is fine, as long as they're not cooked in alcohol. If you just know those couple of things, it's easy. They say, we don't have any fish and none of our meat is halal. Can you give us a robust vegetarian meal? Something that is filling and it's not going to be like little smaller meal that everybody else has at meat, right?
Right. Yeah.
Something comparable. There's always a way around this. That's what I guess I'm trying to say, is that you don't have to go to a halal restaurant. You don't have to go to a Middle Eastern restaurant. It doesn't have to be that way. There are ways to do it. I had a friend who took me to, she's Lithuanian, and she really wanted me to try this European restaurant. And she knows that I eat halal. We've known each other for years. And she said, I know that they have pork and they have other meats, but I checked and they have tons of seafood things for you. And they have lots of vegetables. And it's true that there was so much meat I couldn't have. But then there were all these other things that she checked out ahead of time just to make sure that I could have something. And for most people, that gesture goes a really long way.
Mm-hmm. So, it does.
We're not going to starve. There's plenty of options.
Right.
Really, there are.
Yeah. And I think that's the tricky part there is that alcohol aspect of it too. You know, making sure that nothing's good with that.
Yeah, because a lot of the restaurants, especially the fancier ones, they'll say, well, the wine evaporates or the alcohol evaporates. Right. Typically go with that.
No. Yeah. And I have a woman who I plan meetings for, or she's an attendee and a staff person, I should say. And she's violently ill to wine. And so she's like, no wine, vinegar or anything, and allergics. And she was little. So it evaporates. Well, no, it's still in there.
0.02%. Something
exactly.
Like that. So it's just better to avoid. And then that just avoids any kind of issues going forward. I think what people don't realize is just these gestures of trying to make sure just go such a long way for customer service, for many reasons. But, I feel so much more comfortable with people who have just asked or have tried. That's just, hospitality is that way, right? The hospitality
exactly.
So we should get this.
Exactly. Okay. 2 more questions.
Sure.
What experiences have changed you throughout this journey from before eating halal and then now through this 15 years of what you've been doing?
Well, first of all, I think just being in halal itself, and I've had to really understand food science. And when you understand food science, then you start to know what's in your food. And then that leads you down this path of, oh my God, what's in our food? So, what are we doing to our food and labels? But it's really opened my eyes to what I'm putting in my body, what foods are made of, and towards that policy, like the food and water security issue. Like it kind of made me much more of a purist, and then trying to help solve the problems of what's in our food. So I went from halal to it's bigger than halal. Like we look at halal, we look at ingredients for halal's sake, but then we go down this rabbit hole of like, oh my God, what's in our food? But it can be problematic, but it's kind of opened my eyes to working with people who work on solutions rather than, and not just for halal, but what's better for us, what's healthy for us. So it's led me to talk on even more different topics these days on just health. And that's why I'm so crazy about the Mediterranean diet and food security and things like that, because we're sort of in a crisis. But I've learned that there's power of the pen. There's power of food is such a huge and important topic. So I don't know.
Yeah, it really is. It is. And I was at the food tank event on Sunday, and they said somebody was the Mediterranean diet with the Southern flair, right? Like the Southern and because it's really understanding, it's like you're saying, understanding the Sicilian diet and the Puerto Rican diet and the halal diet, and how do you match all of those things? But even the Mediterranean diet with the U.S. Southern diet, mixing those together. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we have to work with what we have, right? We have. I think we realize we have to stop this, an unconscious consumption, and so people are looking at what's in their backyard versus what's across the world. And how we're getting better at that. So it's a very exciting thing. I think this journey has taught me that things evolve and we evolve. And I thought I was going to just write about halal food and recipes. And it ended up, I ended up wearing so many other hats in the process, but at times it would drive me crazy. But now, back, I think those were all lessons I needed to learn to get to this, right? So I never thought I would be pioneer advocate for, I never labeled myself in any of those ways. I just went with what was in my heart. And I think that's the one lesson I realized is that stick to that. Stick to what's in your heart.
That's awesome. Okay. So then I'm going to end on this question is, how do you want to be remembered for the...
Well, I guess I want to be remembered as someone who tried her best to explain something that was misunderstood and tried to show how we could all come to the table from different understanding aspects, but that by writing, by teaching, by educating, we could lift a lot of hate and we could lift a lot of misunderstandings and ignorance about something, and then be happy at the table and enjoy something at the table. Because I'm really used to, my grandmother used to always say when everybody was upset, like big families, everybody's arguing about something, whatever, and she would say, "Oh, you guys are just hungry. Just sit down and eat." and it would work every time. Like you'd sit down, you eat, and everybody would forget about what they were arguing about. And it's kind of like that. Like if you just have really good food and explain where someone's coming from, like we all want the same thing. So right. I guess I'd like to be remembered as that person who brought peace to the table in that sense, I guess. Yeah. That because halal comes with what came with halal in the beginning is a lot different than it is now. And it wasn't easy to unwrap and unpackage it. And it was at a time when there was a lot of negativity towards us. It's thankfully it's gotten a lot better. And I'd like to think that I was part of that positive change. I hope. And I hope that I'll be remembered for someone who tried to explain it and bring people together.
That's awesome. You make my heart happy.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. And Joan posted in, thank you both for this. We have a long way to go in our industry to be inclusive. There's a variety of ways that we need to do that, but I think this conversation will hopefully help that.
Well, thank you for bringing it to the table, Tracy, and letting me talk about this. And I always feel it's an honor to be able to share our feelings, our stories. And I really thank you for giving me the space to share that.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. And I'm so glad that Sally introduced us, and it took a while, but now we're BFFs. I'm just deeming that now. Okay. So I'm going to put on here, everybody, you can reach out to Yvonne at My Halal Kitchen on Instagram, as well as on her website, My Halal Kitchen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you are for hire in a variety of different ways.
Let's do this.
And thank you very much. As I said, you make my heart happy. Everybody, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.